"She's faking it." That was what they told him. "She isn't blind at all. She's pretending so she can steal from you." Idaho Territory, spring 1808. Silas Granger had heard many foolish warnings in his life, but none delivered with such certainty. The men who stopped him outside the general store spoke in lowered voices, glancing back toward the road as if the woman in question might somehow hear them from miles away. "A man like you should be careful," one of them said. "A woman that size, claiming blindness, no family, no steady history. That's not misfortune, Granger. That's a scheme." Silas said nothing. He had already made his decision. Earlier that afternoon, he had stood in the doorway of a boarding-house room that smelled faintly of soap and dried herbs. He had expected desperation. What he had not expected was dignity. Clementine Foster filled the small space with her presence. Enormous, yes, anyone could see that, but it was not her size that held Silas's attention. It was the way she stood completely still, head slightly tilted, listening, mapping the room without sight, waiting. "I should tell you," she had said calmly before he could ask, "that I am blind." Her eyes, pale green and unfocused, never searched his face. They did not plead. They did not apologize. "I lost my vision 4 years ago to scarlet fever," she continued. "If that disqualifies me, I understand. It usually does." Silas remembered the silence that followed, how the world seemed to hold its breath. Instead of turning away, he had stepped forward. "What disqualifies you," he said, "is whether you can cook, keep house, and survive 3 days' ride from town." She smiled then, just slightly. "I can do all of that," she replied, "and more." Now, hours later, with her belongings loaded onto his wagon and the mountains waiting ahead, those men thought they were doing him a favor. "She'll rob you blind," another muttered. "Funny phrase, that." Schmeidas turned slowly, his expression unreadable. "Has she been charged with anything?" he asked. They hesitated. "Well, no, but everyone knows." "Everyone knows nothing," Silas said quietly, "and I don't build my life on rumor." They watched him drive away, shaking their heads, certain they were witnessing a mistake. They did not see Clementine sitting upright in the wagon, hands folded neatly in her lap, memorizing the sound of the wheels. They did not hear the careful questions she asked about the road, the trees, the bends in the river. They did not notice how, for the first time in years, Silas Granger was not riding alone. By nightfall, they camped beneath the stars. Clementine prepared supper over the fire without sight, her movements precise, unhurried. Silas watched in silence, something unfamiliar tightening in his chest. "You're staring," she said softly. "Am I that obvious?" "Yes," she replied, amused, "but I don't mind. People usually look away." Tomakis looked at her then, really looked. And for the first time since his wife had died, since loneliness had hollowed him out and turned his cabin into a place of survival instead of living, he felt something shift. If the world was wrong about Clementine Foster, then perhaps it had been wrong about many things. And if those men were right, then he would find out soon enough. Before we continue, let me ask you, where are you listening from today? Whether you're at home or on the road, I wish you a warm and joyful Christmas. Now, let's get back to the story. The mountains did not care that Clementine Foster was blind. They did not soften for her weight, nor adjust their slopes out of mercy. The road to Silas Granger's logging camp climbed steadily, narrowed without warning, and vanished into forest so dense it swallowed sound itself. For Clementine, the journey was not frightening. It was familiar. She counted the turns by the rhythm of the wagon wheels. She measured distance by time, by the way the air cooled as they climbed, by the change in bird calls. When the wagon crossed a stream, she noted the echo. When the trees thickened, she smelled sap and damp earth. "You're very quiet," Silas observed on the second day. "I'm working," Clementine replied calmly. "On what?" "Learning where I am," she said. "Blindness doesn't mean disorientation. It just means I use different tools." Silas nodded, ashamed of how often he had assumed otherwise in the past. At night, when they stopped to camp, Clementine cooked without hesitation. She found the pot by touch, judged heat by sound, tested doneness with practiced fingers. The meals were simple but nourishing, far better than anything Silas had made for himself in years. "You don't miss seeing?" he asked one evening, unable to stop himself. Clementine paused, stirring the stew. "I miss being believed," she said. "Sight is only one loss. Trust is the greater one." She told him then, quietly, without bitterness. How the fever had come suddenly, how darkness followed, how her family's patience evaporated once it became clear her blindness was permanent. How she was too large to be pitied gracefully, too disabled to be useful in the way they wanted. "They said I would never marry," she said, "never contribute, never be anything but a burden." Silas stared into the fire, jaw tight. "So I learned to be undeniable," Clementine continued. "I learned skills no one could argue with, cooking, accounts, organization, memory. If I could not see, then I would know." The third day, the wagon crested a ridge and began its descent into the valley where Silas's camp lay hidden. "Describe it to me," Clementine asked softly. Silas did. He told her about the tall pines, the creek cutting through stone, the cabin built from his own hands. He described the bunkhouse, the smokehouse, the wide porch that caught the afternoon sun. Clementine listened intently, filing it all away. "This will be home," she said. Not a question, a statement. The cabin smelled of cedar and solitude when they arrived. Silas spent hours guiding Clementine through every inch of it. He let her touch walls, count steps, memorize corners. He showed her where the stove sat, where knives were kept, how the shelves were arranged. "Tell me if I should change anything," he said. "I will," she replied. "I always do." Within days, the cabin transformed, not through decoration, but through order. Clementine reorganized the kitchen logically, placing items where her hands could find them instinctively. She labeled storage by texture. She established routines. Meals became regular. The chaos of Silas's bachelor existence gave way to rhythm. Silas watched all of this with growing respect. "You don't slow down," he said one afternoon. "I can't afford to," Clementine replied. "People assume blindness makes you helpless. If I pause too long, they take it as proof." Silas felt something twist in his chest. The logging crew arrived weeks later. Rough men, practical men, men who stared. Silas noticed immediately. "She's blind," one whispered, loudly enough to be heard. "And that big?" another muttered. Clementine did not react. She continued, kneading dough, her movement sure. Silas reacted. "She runs this household," he said flatly. "You will treat her with respect, or you'll find work elsewhere." The men fell silent. Respect came slowly, not from pity, but from results. Meals were better. Supplies lasted longer. Accounts balanced for the first time in years. Clementine corrected mistakes Silas didn't even know he was making. One night, after the men had turned in, Silas sat at the table, staring at the ledger Clementine had organized. "You've doubled my efficiency," he said quietly. "I told you I was meticulous," she replied. "You're extraordinary." Clementine's hands stilled. "Careful," she said softly. "People usually say that right before they decide I'm too much trouble." Silas met her unfocused gaze. "I don't say things I don't mean." Outside the cabin, rumors continued to grow. In town, men whispered that Clementine was pretending, that no blind woman could work like that Silas was being deceived. And then the sheriff came riding up the trail. Clementine heard the horse before Silas did. "There's trouble," she said quietly. Silas stepped onto the porch as Sheriff Holbrook dismounted, his expression grim. "Granger," the sheriff said, "I need to speak with Miss Foster. There's an accusation." Clementine stood behind Silas, her posture straight, her face calm. "What kind of accusation?" Silas asked. "Theft," Holbrook replied, "and I'm afraid it's serious." The cabin went silent. Clementine's hands clenched at her sides. Silas did not move. "You're not taking her," he said. Holbrook frowned. "Mr. Granger, you can say whatever you like," Silas interrupted, "but you're not taking an innocent woman without proof." Clementine inhaled slowly. This was the moment she knew too well, the moment where everything she had built could be stripped away by suspicion alone, and for the first time in her life, someone stood in front of her and did not step aside. Outside, the mountain's wool weighted it. Inside, the truth was about to be tested. Sheriff Holbrook did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. Men like him had learned long ago that authority spoke loudest when delivered calmly, as if the outcome were already decided and resistance were merely an inconvenience. "The accusation predates her arrival here," he said, standing on the porch as though he owned it. "A bank theft in Coeur d'Alene. A large sum. Witnesses placed Miss Foster near the building that same afternoon." Clementine did not move. She stood behind Silas, chin lifted, face composed. But inside her chest tightened with a dread she knew too well, not fear of prison, fear of inevitability, because this was how it always happened. Someone decided, others nodded, and she was carried away by assumptions she could never outrun. "I didn't steal anything," she said quietly. Holbrook's expression softened just enough to suggest pity. "That's what everyone says." Silas felt something cold settle in his gut. "Where is your evidence?" he asked. "Marked bills," Holbrook replied, "found in her boarding-house room after she left town." Clementine flinched. "That's impossible," she said. "I never had money like that. Someone put them there." Holbrook sighed. "That will be for the court to decide." "No," Silas said flatly. The word landed like a struck match. Holbrook turned to him slowly. "Excuse me?" "I said no," Silas repeated. "You're not taking her." "Mr. Granger," Holbrook warned, "you are not above the law." Silas stepped forward. "And you are not above prejudice," he replied. "You found money where a woman could not see it. You accepted witnesses who assumed guilt because she fit the shape of a convenient story. That's not law. That's laziness." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "1 week," Silas continued. "Give me 1 week to prove her innocence. If I fail, I'll bring her to town myself." Holbrook hesitated. "You owe me," Silas added quietly. 2 winters ago, when your son was lost in these mountains, I brought him home alive. You told me then you'd remember that." Silence stretched. Finally, Holbrook nodded once. 1 week. After that, I come back with the deputies." And if you interfere again, I arrest you both." When the sound of hooves faded down the trail, Clementine's composure cracked. She sank onto a chair, hands trembling. "You shouldn't have done that," she said. "They'll destroy you along with me." Silas knelt in front of her. "They won't," he said, "because they're wrong." "You don't know that," she whispered. "You don't know me well enough to stake everything on me." "I know enough," Silas replied. "I know you don't lie. I know you work harder than anyone I've ever met. And I know this town would rather believe a blind fat woman is a criminal than accept they made a mistake." Clementine swallowed. "I've spent my life trying to be useful enough to deserve space," she said softly, "and it's never been enough." Silas took her hands, steady and warm. "Then let me do something useful for once," he said. "Let me fight." He left before dawn the next morning, riding hard for Coeur d'Alene. The days that followed were the longest Clementine had known since losing her sight. She kept the cabin running, fed the crew, balanced the accounts, maintained routine because routine was survival. But at night, alone in her room, doubt crept in. What if Silas failed? What if proof did not matter? What if belief was never going to be enough? She had packed her things once already, quietly, just in case. Folded dresses, counted steps, prepared herself to leave without argument, because she had learned that hope, when disappointed, hurt worse than expectation. Silas returned on the 6th day. His horse was lathered, his face grim. Clementine heard him before anyone else. She stood. "You found something," she said. "Yes," Silas replied. "And it's worse than we thought." He told her everything, about the assistant bank manager, about the planted money, about paid witnesses and falsified ledgers, about how easily a town had agreed to sacrifice her to protect a respectable man. Clementine listened without interruption. When he finished, she exhaled slowly. "So I was chosen," she said, "because no one would defend me." Silas shook his head. "You were chosen because they underestimated you, and because they didn't expect anyone to care." She turned toward him, her unfocused eyes fierce. "And now?" "Now," Silas said, "we go back together, and we make them listen." Outside, clouds gathered over the mountains. The journey ahead would not be physical this time. It would be into judgment, confrontation, and truth. And Clementine knew one thing with certainty. She would not walk into that town shrinking. She would walk in standing tall. Silas did not sleep that night. Neither did Clementine. The cabin, once a place of quiet routines and careful order, held a different kind of tension now. Not fear exactly, resolve. The kind that settles in the bones when running is no longer an option. At dawn, Silas saddled his horse. "We leave it in an hour," he said. Clementine nodded. "I'll be ready." But before they left, something changed. Silas walked the perimeter of the camp the way a man does when he knows trouble may follow him home. He checked tools, counted supplies, noted sight lines, the habits of a man who had lived too long in wild places to mistake peace for safety. Clementine listened. She heard the deliberate steps, the way his pace slowed near the tree line, the quiet clink of metal as he adjusted the rifle strap. "You're preparing for more than a meeting with the sheriff," she said. "I'm preparing for what comes after," Silas replied. "Truth doesn't always make people grateful. Sometimes it makes them angry." Clementine considered that. Inside she packed methodically, not clothes, records, ledgers, letters. 3 years of household accounts, neatly dictated, tallied, and memorized. Proof of consistency, of presence, of a woman who had not vanished after a theft, but had built a life mile by mile in the mountains. When the logging crew gathered, sensing something was wrong, Silas addressed them plainly. "There's an accusation against my wife," he said. "It's false. I'm riding to town to end it. I don't know what will follow." The men shifted, exchanged glances. "She's fed us better than any cook we've had," one finally said. "And kept the books cleaner than the company office ever did," another added. A third spat into the dirt. "If someone thinks they can run her out with lies, they'll have to deal with us, too." Silas nodded once. He hadn't asked. He hadn't needed to. They rode to town together. In Coeur d'Alene, the sheriff's office was already crowded. News traveled fast when scandal involved money. Vernon Alcott sat stiffly near the back, his posture tight, eyes sharp, respectable, well-dressed, the kind of man towns trusted without question. Clementine felt him before she heard him. "You're blind," his voice said smoothly. "Must be difficult to know where things end up." Silas took one step forward. "Speak to her again, and we'll end this conversation outside," he said. Sheriff Holbrook banged his gavel. "Enough!" Silas laid the evidence on the table, ledgers, testimony, proof of planted money and paid witnesses, names, dates, patterns. The room went quiet. Holbrook read slowly, then more quickly, then stopped. "This is substantial," he said at last. Alcott stood abruptly. "This is absurd. You're going to believe a mountain logger and his blind wife over a man who served this town for 20 years? Clementine rose. She did not raise her voice. "I lost my sight," she said calmly, "not my integrity. You assumed blindness made me invisible. You assumed my body made me unworthy of defense. You were wrong." Alcott sneered. "You expect sympathy?" "No," Clementine replied. "I expect accountability." Holbrook exhaled heavily. "Vernon Alcott," he said, "you are under arrest for embezzlement, conspiracy, and falsifying evidence." The room erupted. Clementine stood perfectly still as Alcott was led away, shouting, his respectability dissolving with every step. When the noise finally died down, Holbrook turned to her. "Miss Foster," he said, then corrected himself. "Mrs. Granger, the charges against you are dropped, officially and publicly." Clementine inclined her head. "Thank you," she said. "I will accept your apology when this town learns not to mistake difference for guilt." Outside, sunlight spilled across the street. Silas offered his arm. Clementine took it not because she needed guidance, but because she chose closeness. On the ride home, neither spoke for a long time. "You know," Clementine said finally, "this cabin of yours is no longer just a home." Silas glanced at her. "It's a statement now," she continued, "that we don't leave when the world gets ugly." Silas smiled slightly. "Then we'd better be ready." Because even as the truth cleared her name, the mountains whispered a warning. Men like Garrett Slade did not like examples. And the cabin that had sheltered love was about to be tested as a stronghold. Garrett Slade did not arrive quietly. Men like him never did. The sound of hooves cut through the afternoon like a blade, sharp and deliberate, long before Clementine heard the voices. She was standing at the kitchen table, fingers dusted with flour, when the noise reached her. "Silas," she said calmly, "we have company." Silas was already moving. By the time Slade and his men rode into the clearing, Silas stood on the porch, rifle resting against his shoulder, posture loose in the way that warned experienced men not to mistake calm for weakness. Slade dismounted slowly, smiling as if this were a friendly visit. "Granger," he drawled, "heard you caused quite a stir in town." "I don't make a habit of stirring," Silas replied. "I mind my own business." "That so?" Slade's eyes slid past him toward the cabin door. "Funny thing about business. Sometimes other people decide they want it." Clementine stepped onto the porch then. The wind caught her dress. She stood tall, unflinching, her blind gaze fixed straight ahead. Slade laughed softly. "That must be her, the famous blind woman." Silas shifted a half step forward. "Careful," he said. Slade ignored him. "I'll be honest, Granger, your timber rights sit right in the middle of what I want. And now that you've embarrassed certain people in town, you've made yourself inconvenient." "You want to buy my land," Silas said. Slade shrugged. "Buy, take, burn you out. Words are flexible." His eyes narrowed. "But I see a weakness." Silas felt it before Clementine spoke. "Say it," Clementine said evenly. Slade grinned. "A woman who can't see dangers coming. Accidents happen in the wilderness. Fires, bears, falls, especially to someone who depends on others." The clearing went silent. Silas raised his rifle a fraction. "You threaten my wife again," he said quietly, "and I will end you." Slade held up his hands, mockingly placating. "Easy, no threats, just observations." He mounted his horse. "1 week, Granger. Sell me the operation, or you'll discover how lonely these mountains really are." They rode off, laughter trailing behind them like smoke. For a long moment, neither Silas nor Clementine spoke. Then Clementine exhaled slowly. "He thinks I'm the soft place," she said. Silas turned to her. "You're not." "I know," she replied, "but he doesn't. And men like him only learn one way." That night, Silas sent word. Not to the sheriff, to the mountains, trappers, loggers, homesteaders, men who owed favors, men who remembered who had helped them when storms trapped them, when supplies ran low, when sons went missing. They came quietly. By the end of the week, the cabin was no longer isolated. Rifles leaned against posts. Horses stood tied in long lines. Bears burned at the edge of the clearing, watched by men who did not speak much but watched everything. Clementine moved among them without hesitation. She poured coffee, took names, remembered voices, organized meals and watches, gave instructions that were followed without question. One trapper leaned toward Silas and murmured, "She runs this place better than most men run towns." Silas nodded. "That's why Slade miscalculated." When Garrett Slade returned, he did not smile. He reined in his horse, staring at the armed men surrounding the cabin, at Clementine standing beside Silas, unafraid. "This isn't finished," Slade said tightly. "It is," Silas replied. "You came to intimidate one household. You found a community." Slade looked at Clementine one last time, something like unease flickering across his face. Then he turned and rode away. He never came back. But Clementine knew something important had shifted. For the first time in her life, she was not being defended as a burden. She was being defended as a pillar, and that changed everything. Garrett Slade's retreat did not bring peace. It brought waiting. The men who stayed near the cabin did not relax their vigilance. They had seen this kind of thing before. A bully humiliated rarely disappeared quietly. He circled. He looked for weakness. He waited for night or distraction or doubt. Clementine understood this instinctively. Fear had taught her patience long before courage ever did. She adjusted the routines. Watches were staggered, supplies were moved, lanterns placed where shadows could not gather unseen. She never gave orders loudly, never dramatized. She simply spoke, and men listened. 2 on the north line after dark, she said once calmly. Keep the horses saddled another time. Don't let exhaustion make you careless. No one questioned her. One evening, as snowmelt rushed hard in the creek below, Silas found her standing alone near the porch rail, listening to the water. You should rest, he said. So should you, she replied. They stood together in silence. Does it frighten you, he asked carefully, that this may never be simple again? Clementine considered the question. My life was never simple, she said. It was just quieter when I was alone. Now it's louder, but it's honest. That night the fire came, not to the cabin, to the timberline. The smell reached Clementine first, smoke sharp and wrong, riding the wind. Silas, she said, now. Men were already moving when the glow appeared between the trees. Flames licked upward, fast and hungry, threatening the stored lumber that represented years of work. Slade had not come with guns. He had come with fire. Buckets! Silas shouted. Clementine did not shout. She stepped into the center of the chaos and raised her voice just enough to be heard. Form lines! 2 to the creek, 2 to the timber edge. Don't chase flames, starve it. The men moved. Water flew. Dirt was thrown. Axes rang as fire breaks were cut. Smoke stung eyes and burned throats, but the line held. Clementine stood where she could hear everything. She listened for panic, for hesitation, for mistakes. When someone slipped, she called out. When someone tired, she reascended. Silas watched her in awe. She could not see the fire, but she understood it. By dawn the flames were dead. The loss was minimal. The message was not. When the sheriff arrived hours later, drawn by smoke and word of the attempt, he found a camp still standing. This was arson, Holbrook said grimly. Silas nodded. We know who did it. Holbrook looked at Clementine. I owe you more than an apology, he said quietly. You held this place together. Clementine tilted her head toward him. Then do your job. Slade was arrested 2 days later on multiple charges. Witnesses came forward, too many this time for money or threats to silence. The mountains had chosen their side. When the last outsider rode away and quiet returned, exhaustion finally claimed its due. That evening, Silas and Clementine sat by the hearth, the cabin smelling of smoke and soup and survival. You stood in the fire, Silas said softly. So did you, Clementine replied. He took her hands, rough and warm, and held them carefully. I once thought blindness was what made people underestimate you, he said. I was wrong. It's fear. They fear what doesn't bend. Clementine smiled faintly. They mistook stillness for weakness, she said. They always do. Outside, the mountains settled back into silence. The danger had not disappeared, but it had been answered. And what remained was something neither of them had ever truly known before. Safety earned. After the war, the mountains grew quiet in a different way. Not the fragile quiet of waiting, but the settled silence that comes when danger has tested a place and found it unwilling to yield. The men who had come to defend the cabin drifted away gradually, each leaving with a nod, a clasp of hands, or a few simple words. She's strong, one said before riding out. Stronger than most, another added. Clementine listened to their footsteps fade down the trail, memorizing the way the clearing sounded as it returned to just her and Silas. The rhythm of the place had changed. The cabin no longer felt temporary. It felt claimed. Inside life resumed, not as it had been before, but as something deeper. Clementine rebuilt routines with quiet authority. She reorganized stores lost to smoke, adjusted meal plans, accounted for every tool, every board, every sack of grain, order returned not because the threat was gone, but because order was how she reclaimed control. Silas watched her with a steady admiration that no longer tried to hide itself. "You know," he said one evening as she counted supplies by touch, "most people would have broken under all that." Clementine smiled faintly. Most people were never allowed to practice resilience. Winter crept closer. Frost edged the mornings. The firewood stacks grew taller. Silas's limp ached more in the cold, but he never complained. Clementine noticed anyway, adjusting workloads without comment, placing his chair closer to the hearth. One night, as snow began to fall softly outside, Silas spoke. "This place is yours," he said, "legally, practically, in every way that matters." Clementine's hands stilled. "I was always afraid of homes," she admitted. "They were things I was allowed to occupy, never own." "You own this one," Silas said firmly, "and I won't let anyone take it from you." She turned toward his voice. "I don't need protecting," she said. "I know," he replied. "I need choosing." The words settled between them, heavy and honest. Clementine breathed in slowly. "Then I choose this," she said. "I choose you. Not because I need shelter, because I want partnership." Silas reached for her, careful, reverent. Their marriage was quiet, no town ceremony, no audience eager to judge, just a small gathering in the clearing come spring, witnessed by mountains, neighbors who mattered, and a preacher who asked only one thing. "Do you take each other freely?" he said, "without fear or apology?" "Yes," Clementine said. "Yes," Silas echoed. Life after that was not perfect. Children came, hard seasons followed, gossip never fully died. But the cabin stood, and inside it lived a woman who had once been accused of seeing too little, and a man who had learned to see clearly at last. Together they built something the world could not undo, a home not made of wood and law alone, but of trust, of being believed, of being chosen. Some lies survive because they are convenient. Some truths survive because someone is brave enough to stand beside them. Clementine was never dangerous because she was blind or large. She was dangerous because she refused to disappear. Silas was never heroic because he was strong. He was heroic because he believed her when disbelief was easier. This story is not about the past. It is about what happens when someone finally says, "I see you," and means it. If you're listening right now and have ever been warned that you were too much, too different, too inconvenient to be trusted, this story is for you. Tell me, where are you listening from today? And if you still believe that being believed can change a life, stay with me. Another story is waiting